Why We Bleep is sponsored by Signal Sounds. Hey you, Tony Rolando fan. Do you have no control over the fact that you need to make noise? The exponential rise of your modular cases got you struggling to function? Because you did the maths. And to morph the dream into a rosy reality will put too much pressure on the points in your bank account. Worried staying in the black will take too much gold? Thinking of reneging? End the cycle? No. Coast on over to signalsounds.com where cues are a thing of the past. A rich mix of options strike like a bolt of lightning. They've got the 4MS Ensemble Oscillator back in black and looking good. The new system's instruments inertia is set to move. The after-later Bleep Bloop 2000. From a podcast about modules that made a module. Why don't I have a module? And the schlappy boundary that sounds 100% made up but is real, and Alex is raving about it. Plus the SSF Auto Dub, a stereo VCA with an FX send return on a button that you whack to put echoes in your phones. You can tell, harmonic bliss awaits. So to make noise music, visit signalsounds.com. That's signalsounds.com. Why? Hi, welcome to Why We Bleep. Today I'm extremely proud to present a conversation with Tony Rolando. Tony Rolando is the person behind Make Noise Music, a very well-known company in the world of Eurorack. But this conversation is full of the story of Tony creating Make Noise. And it is really interesting to be able to talk to someone who's basically come from nowhere, you know? And I hope Tony doesn't mind me saying that, but it's like, you know, he grew up in central Illinois and was just a kid into Van Halen who wanted to make music. And yet somehow, bit by bit, effort by effort, he has built a successful company that employs multiple people in North Carolina and is talked about as one of the most celebrated Eurorack companies. Truly, that, you know, while it's a niche, you know, within a niche, it's an incredible achievement. And he's really built that from very humble beginnings. He did not have huge financial backing, and he did not also have, interestingly, access to Buchla and Surge synthesizers. He didn't have a Surge dual universal slope generator when he was developing maths. He had a clone of part of it and then was using DERPFA modules and reading specs and what he could glean from the internet and inferring things that he could learn about the designs. He did not have like a Buchla 259 sitting around. And I'm pretty sure in the podcast I give it the wrong name. 259, by the way, is the correct name of that module. A complex oscillator from Buchla that he did not have, yet he made a complex oscillator module called a DPO. So it's interesting to know that Tony has not had the things that he has made versions of. He's simply learned what he could about the design and put his own spin through necessity because he didn't own them. Although, with that said, of course, now he does have access to those things. So it was very interesting to begin this conversation with a talk about how he uses inspiration about everything because he now has access to it. But he didn't at the time. Talking to Tony is talking to a person from really humble beginnings who has built something with blood, sweat, and tears and far too much work. Like, it's really interesting hearing Tony talking about making the quad multimode gate. And despite, by the way, that a lot of people complain about the cost of the QMMG, like now and so on and so forth, Tony's overriding comment is how little they sold it for back in the day. versus how much work he was physically putting into making those modules. Something that people that you nor I cannot appreciate when we see a product on a web page or a forum post saying, hey, I made this, and hey, it's available for sale. Like, you have no idea the amount of work that went into making that. And especially, as Tony says in this podcast, it's not like a denigration of Tony, it's just a truth. He's like, you know, I've got some smarts, but I'm not necessarily the best business person. And it's the person who's passionate about something, but not necessarily the best business person, who makes something and charges a price for it arbitrarily that doesn't represent the amount of work and effort that goes into it. I bring this up because it's an interesting point as we endlessly debate on the internet about how a certain thing should cost a certain amount, and it does or it doesn't. Hardware is hard. And as I talk to these companies, I have come to appreciate more and more how much effort goes into making these things that we buy, and how we are blindsided by mass market technologies to think that things should cost far less than it's reasonable for them to, especially given the fact that we don't appreciate that they're perhaps being made by just one guy, or one guy and his wife, who very patiently is soldering modules on the porch, as they did before Tony started to employ people and actually build a company. So all this and more await you in this conversation, a biographical exploration of the life of Tony from Make Noise. It begins with a conversation talking about a certain polyphonic synth from Yamaha that I spied behind Tony in the webcam view of him as we were chatting via the magic medium of the internet. So without further ado, I would like to present this conversation with Tony Rolando from Make Noise. Thanks. Yeah, and I hope you're well. Are you in your office? Where are you? Where are you right now?
I'm in my home studio right now.
Oh. What is that behind you?
There is the Yamaha CS80.
Talk me through. Is that yours? That belongs to you?
Yeah. It's awesome. It's probably my favorite poly synth, mostly because the keypad is really unique. I mean, the thing has a lot of wood in it. Like, there's actual, like, the body is made out of wood. If you pop it open, like, everything that the circuit boards sit on is, like, it's all, like, wood framing throughout. But the keys are wood, and you can really feel it. And they're, like, they're weighted. It feels like a piano almost. Not quite as much, but close. But there's this sensing in it that's really, it's just unlike anything else I've ever played. And I've tried a few of the MPE keyboards, like the C board. And those are cool, but this is different. It's like more like you actually take kind of quite a little bit of strength. Like it's like you really kind of have to lay into it, but it likes that. Like like it really can handle like really like kind of hammering on it or like kind of leaning on it. It really likes that. Yeah, the sound in it itself is unique. It's not. I think a lot of people will probably be surprised. Like what's things about it? Like the envelopes are really. They're pretty snappy, like you really don't get those, like, it's people associate it so much with like these really long, like kind of big swelling pads, but the range of the attack times and release, it's like only the very like upper 10, maybe not even like last 5% of the range that you start to get that. So it's basically you max it out and you get that. It's not like a lot of synths that came later in the 80s or today where you have like a really fine gradient to adjust that with. It's really kind of, there's one long, it's like short long. There's not like a lot of, and it's very snappy. The envelopes can be extremely snappy, snappier than you would think.
Do you think that's because when they designed it, they were like, was there an appetite for pads?
No, right. You're right.
Do you know what I mean?
People wanted to make, yeah. And I mean, if you look at, the only thing that comes close is like some of the string sounds that you can do with it. And there's presets on it. Most of the presets are very plucky. It's like guitar, clav, piano. There's a few others. A lot of them are like more like plucked kind of sounds. So it really excels at those kind of sounds. But there's just a lot of really interesting things about it that just aren't on synthesizers today.
What is so different?
Well, I guess, a lot of it I think comes from not having any memory. A lot of things that would be buried in like a sort of like global parameter set in a modern synth, or even like a synth from the 90s, or even like 80s really, are like right there in front of you. So for example, the response of the touch sensing is like right there, as if like you would be adjusting it while you're playing. The mix between the upper and lower sound set is right there. Things like, like if you want to modulate pitch, that can be done with like velocity and all, after pressure, all these things. That's all right there with big switches where it's really easy to kind of modify it while you're playing. So it's just things that seem like they would be in a global, they are literally global parameters, but they're right there in front of you. And I think today when we think global parameters, we're thinking like a sub menu nested somewhere like inside the instrument where you're going to change these things once and probably not again for months. Whereas they're right there. You're constantly, I'm constantly adjusting like the sensitivity, how it's modulating pitch with, with the initial and after pressure and all that kind of stuff. Maybe compromise isn't even the right word. Maybe it's more just the way things developed. It seemed like people didn't want to adjust these things as often, so designers started kind of tucking them away and putting the things that it seemed like people wanted more of, like right out in front of them.
Do you think it's also a reflection of the sea change in cost effectiveness? The CS80 was from an era of like where synthesizers were, for want of a better term, for like the elite, which is it wasn't a mass market product, and so it didn't have to be designed with so much cost in mind. And I guess, how do you feel about that? Because we live in a world where that's just not the case anymore.
Oh, right. No, I think about that all the time. Yeah, in fact, even at the high prices that a CS80 commands today, they still sell below their original retail price. That's something people don't realize. Adjusted for inflation, a CS80 was about $30K, approaching that. Yeah.
So they're still cheaper.
Yeah. Crazy, right? So, the market for them was probably like mostly studios where they would have instruments like this, and that might attract a musician to come and record there or to, compose there. So, I guess, the market was just totally different. If you look inside this thing, you can kind of see why it would have cost that much to build. The wiring harnesses alone are like a piece of art. It's just, and you just wouldn't do something like that today because people wouldn't, there's no actual added value to that. It looks beautiful when you open it up. Like I said, it looks like a work of art. In the end, you could have done the same thing a lot more easily today, just with the way we would produce circuit boards and wiring assemblies and that kind of thing. We've just gotten more efficient at it. And so you just wouldn't need to do that. We live in an amazing time. I only have this because it's my livelihood. Synthesizers is what I do. So I have nearly any synthesizer that I would ever want to look at and listen to and study and play. I'm just going to get it because it's what I do. But if it wasn't, then I wouldn't have this.
Yeah.
I would have one of the many other synthesizers, some of which I do have, that are wonderful as well. We have so many choices, and it's kind of incredible.
What goes through your mind when you encounter a synth? As a synth designer, you go up to a CS80 or any of the other classic synths you may own. It's like, what are you literally thinking when you look at them?
Initially, I want to try to understand what the magic is. Like, what is it about playing this instrument that sparks people so much? Like, what is it about this instrument that brought Vangelis to buy 7 of them? That's a pretty...
Do you really?
That's
7.
I've already had 6 or 7 of them. Yeah. So what is it? What is it that makes people feel so wonderful while they play it? And that's, I mean, it could go for anything. I mean, it could be a modern instrument. You know, a lot of people love the electron stuff, for example. So I have played all of the electrons. I've from the digitone and digitact to the analog four, the analog rhythm. I've tried my damnedest at the octatrack and failed. The new ones, the littler ones, the model samples and model cycles, all of them. I mean, I have either owned or had on loan for extended periods of time, all of them, and played them all and learned them all because thousands of musicians who love these things, who are just totally enamored with. I just want to know, what is it about these that they love so much? What are they getting from these? What makes these so special?
Do you have what are your major takeaways? Like looking at that modern equipment, you know, what are people getting right?
What are people getting right? Whew, that is a big question. Well, I do enjoy the digitone a lot. I also enjoyed the digitac, although I'm not as much, like, sampling is sometimes like an extra step that I don't always feel like taking. Whereas the digitone is just, you can create the sounds right there. So those instruments, both of them, and the level of programmability is unparalleled to anything that existed in hardware in the past. I mean, you go back and you look at even some of the most popular sequencers, for example. You look at like something like an Alesis MMT8 or some of the Roland sequencers. I think we've gone mega deep, you know, with things. We've just taken it like all the way as deep as it needs to go. I don't know. I guess we'll see. So yeah, I mean, that's probably the things that pushing in that direction has probably satisfied a lot of people's curiosity of like, well, what if, you know, we had a sequencer where you could have the same note played differently each time the sequence cycles back around, and then, you know, they listened and they did that, that's something that in modular is easy to program. That's part of modular. It's part of what makes it wonderful. When you first encounter these things, like, oh, well, you know, you can patch this, but not everybody's patching. Not everybody wants that type of instrument. So in a drum machine, that was a pretty unique thing, and that's just like the tip of the iceberg of the stuff that's going on in those machines. So, you know, obviously with modular, we got a lot right. I mean, geez, it's just, I mean, for a minute, it was like looking around trying to find like a battered old ARP 2600 or like maybe a dope for basic system that somebody had like jettisoned at a pawn shop or something. And now, I mean, modular is everywhere. That's pretty great, I think. I think we got that right. It's the level of creativity and uniqueness from one company to the next. I mean, we haven't seen something like that in the music instrument industry since, you know, when things like the CS80 were being built. Things kind of got solidified. A few companies kind of rose to the top, and they kind of drove the industry all through the 90s. Hence, you know, things like the Groove boxes and all the Roland and Yamaha products that people remember from that time period. Sometimes when I try to think of all the different modules out there, or the ones that even just the ones that just interest me, not everything out, just the ones that I'm interested in. I mean, I'm like, my God, there's just, if I could rattle off like 25 modules that I've never even gotten a chance to try yet, that I'm still kind of curious about. I mean, it's pretty incredible. I think we got that right.
I wanted to go back before we sort of talk about the current state of things. I'd love to ask you about the past, and like for you personally, where did you grow up? Did you grow up in Asheville, and how did you come to synths and electronics?
So I grew up in Central Illinois, which is nothing like Asheville. It's a lot flatter. It's not a beautiful place. It's fine. It's just not a beautiful place the way Asheville is.
Well, how do you describe it?
It's kind of barren. It's a lot of cornfields. When you drive on the highways are just they're so straight. I mean, you're just driving straight for like hours, and it's just flat on both sides. It's kind of like tornado country kind of thing. And I got into synths probably in a way that a lot of kids who grew up in the 80s did, just through listening to the radio and hearing, like artists like Eddie Van Halen when he did Jump. And, you know, I was really into Van Halen and guitar. And then he's playing an Oberheim I guess it was an OBX of some sort, OBXA or something. of course, at the time, I had no idea. I saw it was this massive keyboard, and he's playing it in the video, and it's just kind of mind blowing. You know, it's like, whoa, this guy's the best guitarist in the world, obviously, and he's playing this keyboard. I'm interested. And then, you know, all of the stuff. I mean, Prince, with all the drum machines and whatnot. You were hearing it on the radio, maybe seeing it in a video on MTV or something, and that's kind of where it stopped. I mean, it wasn't like you could just go into a music store, or at least not where I live. You couldn't just go into a music store and find this stuff. It was, well, kind of like what you were saying. It was like kind of a level. It kind of ties back to what you were saying about something like the CS80. Yeah, I mean, I remember going into the music store where I rented a guitar so I could start learning to play guitar. I don't remember seeing like an Oberheim in there or a Lynn drum or anything. They didn't have that stuff probably because nobody in my town would have bought it. So why would they stock it anyhow? You know, probably if you went into a nice music store in Hollywood, you would have seen all that stuff at that time. But back then you just didn't see it. They had the best stuff they had was a nicer Fender guitar, for example. So yeah, so that's one way that it was pretty different, and one way that things have changed quite a bit today. Most music stores you walk into are going to have a full range of musical instruments and recording gear represented. Everything you could possibly need to make any form of music that you could possibly dream up. You could probably buy it at even the most average music store in the United States today. Probably just over there as well. And so, yeah, so it was different. So I didn't have any idea where those things came from or what they looked like. I just was hearing them. And it wasn't really until a little later when I started understanding how records were made a little bit more. I was kind of getting into them, and I bought, the library would sell records. I think they weren't getting checked out a lot, or maybe they were scratched up or something. They were really cheap. And I bought a copy of Mort Subotnick's Silver Apples, and that would have been probably like 88, 89. And, you know, of course I was completely dumbfounded by it, but also a little intrigued, like, what is, like, is this music? I mean, you know, you're like 1989, I would have been like, whatever, like 13 or something. I don't know. I just did not make any sense to me, but it was also really intriguing. Like, oh, well, this is something that I haven't heard before. And all it said on the back was, it mentioned that it was composed on the Buchla. There was no pictures or anything. It just said it was composed on, what's a Buchla? Okay, go to the library, look it up. Nothing.
Yeah. B for Buchla.
End of the line for like until, you know, another like whatever 5-6 years pass and you know the internet starts becoming more available. And yeah, so that was kind of like there's a lot of dead ends like that, I think, back then, because you could only research so far. You know, if the library didn't have a book about it, you were kind of left wondering, okay, all right.
Guess I'll wait for the internet to be invented.
Or just move on to the next thing. Yeah, just move on to the next thing.
Were you drawn to Silver Apples of the Moon because it was cheap, or is it you were literally just like flip, flip, flip? That's just a cool name.
The cover. Yeah, it had a really cool cover. That's how I bought a lot of records back then, because I didn't know what any of this stuff was. It was just, they were all like a quarter or 50 cents. And would just go there and pick through, find some cool looking covers. And, you know, some were interesting, some were total duds, but they still had cool covers, and that's the whole that was the thing that brought you in, right?
So you remember Buchla then? How do you then go from knowing that name to really appreciating what it is?
What's kind of interesting is even once information was kind of flowing more, and, you know, people were starting, you know, there was not forums, they were...
a BBS or whatever.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Like email lists. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And people are talking about synthesizers and all that stuff. But even then, the Buchla stuff was still pretty mysterious. You know, the weird thing was the company was still operational in some shape or form through all of this, or maybe not through all of it, but, you know, like I remember when the 200E came out, I'm pretty sure I read an article written by Bob Moog that was about it. It was like a review or something. And, but it was like, okay, well, that looks crazy. That's interesting. I need to figure out a way that I can check that out. But I mean, you know, what music store would have a 200E system?
Even now.
You know, because this would have still been like 99 to whatever, maybe not that late, but like, I feel like that article would have been like early 2000s or something that I saw it in a magazine. I mean, maybe I'm mixing this stuff up, but I'm pretty sure I read it. Bob Moog reviewed it. Gosh, I mean, that was a big thing too, right? I mean, magazines was where you got almost anything that you were going to figure out about what was out there, you got from magazines. And you all had Sound on Sound, which was a really good one. And you could get that in the States, but it was really expensive. So like Electronic Musician was like whatever, $3-4 or whatever. That was always like $12 or something.
Yeah.
But it was, you could still stand in the Walden Books or whatever and read it. So it didn't really stop you. So there's a lot of that too.
But even at the time, they wouldn't be writing much about Buchla. I can't imagine.
No, not then, no.
There wasn't. And I mean, the whole synth industry, because that's kind of the time when I got into it. And I remember I was reading Future Music magazine. That's what my brother had, brother influences. And it's sort of, I mean, analog was a distant memory at that point. It was an old bygone thing. And we were... it was all just about what Roland and Korg and Yamaha were kind of pumping out at that time. And it was great gear. It just wasn't analog, a lot of it.
Right.
It wasn't modular, certainly. So it was a weird time. So I suppose but you'd maintained an interest in synths. It had obviously, something had awakened in you.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think and this is going to be kind of funny, but one instrument that I could get my hands on a lot that I really liked were these Farfisa organs. So I had a lot of those over the years in varying states of functionality. They sound really great when you plug them into a guitar amp or a bass amp. They're incredible sounding. And so I had a lot of those. I had also gotten kind of, at the same time, I had also bought some Music Concrete records. This is like going back to like 88, 89 when I found that Subotnick record. That same library had some Music Concrete compilations. And looking back on them now, I see the names that are on them and I recognize them, like Pierre Henry, for example. And these are pretty cool records. And they were, again, those were almost maybe even more intriguing to me because they were kind of like these strange, like sound collages. So they had a lot of like what I thought was sampling. It's the late 80s, so samplers were huge at that time. So I thought they were samples. I didn't realize they were like cut up tape and everything until I learned a little bit about them and actually was able to find a book about Music Concrete at a library in Southern Illinois. And so I read that and it kind of went through and kind of talked about the history of it and like how it was done and all this stuff. And that was kind of formative too, because it was just kind of crazy thought to me. Like, oh, wait, these people were recording things to tape and then cutting pieces of tape and then rearranging them. It's like just so hard to fathom. Like tape was always just like a station, you put a cassette tape in your recorder and you hit record and that's it. It was just such a linear thing. The tape ran from start to finish. This idea of like going in and like cutting the tape into little pieces and rearranging it was kind of mind blowing, I think. And also keep in mind that the DAW hadn't really taken hold yet. So sampling like MPC or like what was the Ensoniq one, the ASR, like that kind of stuff, was the closest you were going to get to that. And that kind of stuff was pretty unobtainable for someone my age at that time. But I did find I found this amazing reel-to-reel machine that was made by a German company. And I swear it was called the Superbola. I've looked for this brand everywhere. I've never found another one. But this thing was incredible because it had built into it, had a splicing block built in, which was really cool. And it had this built-in sound-on-sound functionality. So you could record it in one channel and then you would hit the sound on sound button and you could play along with what was in that channel and record it over to the other channel. That was all built into it. So you didn't have to have the external mixer or anything. You just built in. And then the other cool thing is it had a built-in echo, which was not tape-based. Probably was BBD or something like that because the thing was pretty old. And I made a bunch of recordings with that. I tried chopping them up and splicing them together just like they talked about in the book. And it was a lot of fun. And I think I learned a lot. I mean, I don't think I was doing anything like that was actually that great, but it was still a really fun learning experience. Also, it just sounded really good. You just plug a guitar straight into it and it sounded good. It was like distorted, really cool. But eventually the motor in that thing died and I left it in the alley behind the house where I was living at the time because it just didn't seem like it was worth even fixing. Because at that point, you could just, I was like, oh, I'll find another one of these in another thrift store somewhere. I got it at a thrift store.
Yeah. Oh,
it was like
no.
$15, came with like a box of used tape. I just assumed I'd find another one, but I never did. Never found another one exactly like that.
So where are you at that point? You've had a guitar, you've been like playing around with tape. How old are you and where are you? Are you serious about music in some way?
So that would be like 93, 90, like maybe like 94, 95. And the other one, I'm sure you remember this one, the Casio SK1 was another one that was a very affordable synthesizer. But I mean, that thing like kind of changed the game for like when you're younger. I remember playing with the SK1 the first time they had it at the mall. And you're not even gonna believe this, but I swear this is what happened. I walked up to it and I didn't know anything about it really. I mean, I just saw they had them set up so kids could play them. And I tapped the key. At this point, this thing's brand new. It just came out, whatever the year it came out. And I tapped the key and I hear, Aaron Masrum. Aaron Masrum. Aaron Masrum. Aaron Masrum. Aaron Masrum was a kid who lived 4 houses down the block from me.
What?
Yeah. This is literally the first time I've ever played this thing, and it's literally saying the name. This kid he was maybe like a year older than me or something. He lived I'm not even joking, 4 houses up. It was kind of crazy. I always remember that. That's when I was like, oh, weird. Like this thing, you can actually put your own sounds into it. Maybe, oh, okay, this is interesting.
But then, were you serious about music? Were you were listening to music, you had a guitar, you were dabbling in music, but to what degree were you kind of like, music needs to be a part of my life? What were your aspirations at that point?
Oh, I mean, I wanted to be a musician. I wanted to be in a band. And I mean, from the first time that I heard Van Halen or Prince, these records that they were playing on the radio when I would have been like, whatever, 10 or something. I mean, it was just totally captivating. And it was like I thought about it constantly. And I mean, I begged my parents to let me take guitar lessons. And, back then it was like, you didn't just go, I think because guitars were kind of more expensive, even a student level guitar was still pretty expensive back then. And so we rented a guitar because it was like, okay, well, you're going to stick with this, and we'll rent you a guitar for a little while. You can try and learn some chords, that kind of thing. It's different than today where you can go $100, you can get a pretty decent playing guitar to start with at least. So yeah, no, I had the guitar. I mean, I scratched all kind of things up. Like buddy of mine played drums and was throwing out old drums that were broken. So I would kind of grab those, and I had a drum set that I had assembled from pieces from different people that didn't want them anymore. There was all kinds of random keyboards, like just whatever you could get your hands on. One thing that I really liked was my dad had this stereo component that was, it was to make your studio albums sound like they were live.
I had reverb.
Made by Pioneer. It was just a reverb, right? A spring reverb. But I had, kind of pulled that out from my stereo, and I plugged my guitar into that and play it, which sounded awesome. And yeah, starting bands with people that went nowhere, obviously. Recording we didn't really have, that's the other thing today, you record a record that sounds like it was made in a studio that would cost whatever, like $800 a day in, a room the size of this room. So at that time it was mostly like boom boxes with the mics built in kind of thing. And then, there was a guy who got one of the 4-tracks. That's a little later. It was a friend of mine got a 4-track. So he became like the de facto studio. Like everyone would go to his house to record their songs.
The Steve Albini of the street.
Yeah, kind of. I'm sure it must have driven him crazy now that I think back. Like we would just like line up to like, yeah. I mean, he was pretty patient with us now that I think of it. He'd be hyped. He'd be like, yeah, come over, record your song. But I'm thinking, my God, I mean, everybody I knew was going to this guy's house to use his 4-track. Must have been like an endless stream of people just coming in there to record their crappy songs to his what seemed like amazing 4-track.
I mean, that kid, he's getting his 10,000 hours in though, so he's going to be like decent by the time he's like quitting high school. So there's all this guitar stuff, but when do you first get your hands on a proper actual synth?
Proper actual synth. I mean, probably the first And then some people wouldn't consider this a synth, but the first thing that I got would be a Farfisa combo organ. Had a few of those, but the one that was really nice was actually sold to me from a nice guy that I worked with. He was in a cover band, and they did, I mean, this is going to sound insane, but they had this list of songs. They probably had 500 songs, and they did all of the top 10 hits from this very specific year period, and they would recreate them really well. Like they had an old PA system that had like reverb built in and stuff. I'm pretty sure it was like a Shure Vocal Master kind of thing. So I went to their space to get it. They had a few of these Farfisas because they used them in a bunch of the songs, and they were very into like playing the songs the way they had been played back in the 50s or whatever. I can't remember the time period. I guess it probably would have been more like the 60s. But they had a Farfisa and they sold it to me for $100. So that was the first like nice synthesizer, although I'm sure some people would argue that's not a synthesizer, that's an organ. But you could make a lot of different sounds with that. And for $100, it was, I mean, there's a lot to be done. I mean, for one, it had 100% polyphony. I mean, every key that you held down made a sound. So that could be, that was actually pretty interesting. And so I was by then I was in a band with these two women, and one of them played keyboards, I played guitar, and the other played drums. And that kind of, the Farfisa kind of actually led us into a lot of other synths because the Farfisa was so dodgy when you take it to different gigs. And so we started looking for different stuff to use instead of that. It led us to all sorts of things, just whatever you could get at the time for a few, a couple $100. So at that time, that was Roland Junos, believe it or not. We had a few Juno 6s, never a 106. We had 6s, 60s. And all this stuff, we'd just play until it stopped working. And at that point, I would try to repair it. And my knowledge wasn't really that great at that point yet. So if I couldn't repair it, it would just get like, I don't even know, like given away or something.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Yeah. Korg Poly 6, like all that stuff was just the cheap stuff at the time. This is like mid to late 90s, so it's just whatever was pretty cheap at the, I'm not even joking, the pawn shop, Midwest Buy and Sell in Chicago. They're still open to this day, I believe. And that guy, he loved guitars, he hated synthesizers. So anytime a synthesizer would come in, he just wanted to get it out of there as fast as possible. He didn't know how they worked. I bought DX7s for $50, because he just didn't want them. He didn't know anything about them, and he didn't want to learn anything about them, but they would come in, and he would take them in on trade, and then it'd be like myself and my friend Ryan going in there, like, how much you want for this Korg Poly 6? That thing, I don't even know if that works. He'd be grumpy asshole about it. He hated us because he didn't want to sell those things. He wanted to sell guitars. That's where he's like, that's where the money is. Oh, and Sonic Mirages. Had quite a few of those because, again, it was a sampler. And I believe the first one I got was from him, but it had no disc with it. So he almost gave it to me. I mean, I feel like it was like $10 or something. He couldn't get it to do anything. You needed a disc to even get that thing to go. The operating system wasn't built into it. It was on a disc. And so that led me down this big hunt to find a way to get that thing running. And I met a bunch of people really early, like internet group about the Mirage. And we started trading discs. I bought a few discs, traded disc, and I amassed like a massive collection of Sonic Mirage disc over like a period of time. So yeah, the Mirage, we used that not so much in any bands or anything. I just liked that thing for some reason. It's just cool. It was a cheap sampler. It was really hard to use, like a 2-digit display. You're like trying to like truncate a sample. It was hexadecimal. It was like a hexadecimal. The display gave all your values in hexadecimal because it was only 2 digits. So yeah.
I'm not sure that's useful in a way. Like I think the Akai S612 did it perfectly with a slider.
That thing ruled. That thing was way cooler, way better.
Yeah.
And it sounds awesome. And the sliders to set the start and end time. God, genius. Yeah. Scott Yeager did that with the I always remember the name of the expander is Sound of Thunder. How come I can't remember that? That's terrible. I can't remember that.
If he's listening, I'm sure he's judging you. But
sorry, Scott.
As we've said, there's thousands of Eurorack modules. How are you supposed to remember all their names?
But that one is really cool, so it's worth remembering. And it had the sliders for start and end time. And if you pushed them past each other, it would go in reverse. So yeah, no, I played in bands and stuff, and I mean, I was definitely into synthesizers then, and anything echoes. I don't know why echoes. I mean, I would any echo I could find, I would buy it. It didn't matter how shitty it was. It could be like an echo that was built into like some crappy DJ mixer. If it was like under $50, it was worth a try. I've owned so many different echoes. Each one is like unique in its own way, special way. The ones I really searched after back then though were the Effectrons because they had that infinite button on them, and that button was really really awesome. But you could attach it to a foot switch and like play a guitar chord in and hit the infinite button. So cool, very very cool. Let's see, we were in Chicago, then we went to New York City and got really into synthesizers. I mean, I was pretty into that stuff even in Chicago though. But that's like the time period. Yeah, like you said, like all the Korg, Roland stuff, Yamaha stuff was out. Like the Korg started doing the Electribe, the ER1, the EA1. That's like late 90s, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like early noughties. No, you're probably right. But I feel like it is early noughties. It's like just that turn of the millennium.
Right, you probably are right. Because the first one that I saw that was really cool out of that group was the Roland JP8000, the blue plastic synth.
With the sliders.
And there was a band in Chicago that had one of those. And I remember the bass player played it. And I noticed like when he was playing it, he would just hit one key, but like a riff would come out. And afterwards I was talking about it and he's showing me like, oh, it has this phrase thing that you can do. So he would record in all these riffs. And since he was playing bass, he would just hit the key while he's playing bass. And then the synth riff would play out in the into the PA. I thought that was pretty amazing. That thing was very cool when it came out because they had all the sliders and stuff. And all the stuff before then, it didn't have the sliders and whatnot. So like you said, I mean, analog was kind of like a memory at that point. So you were either finding something old and really, really out of shape because no one was caring for this stuff and it wasn't worth repairing at that point so much. So usually the stuff was pretty dodgy and like not working great. That thing came out. I mean, obviously was way out of my price range at that time, but it was kind of mind-blowing to see a product in like a Guitar Center that had all those sliders on it. And then after that, walk into the Guitar Center and you see the Moog Voyager. That was it. There was nothing else. There was no other analog stuff like that would have been in like a corporate, like big Guitar Center type music store, Sam Ash Guitar Center. You probably have the similar things over in the UK.
Absolutely. There would have not. There was the shop, I worked at a shop called Turnkey and it had a vintage synthesizer museum, but they were there. They did the Voyager. And I guess that was 2002, wasn't it? Or around then. And it was, you're right, it was just like a standalone, like it's the Mini Moog back. I don't think the Mini Moog was as common knowledge as it was now, just in the same way that all this knowledge is so freely available now and it kind of wasn't at this time.
Yeah. Yeah, seeing that, yeah, you saw that. There was just nothing else like it in the shop. Actually, well, let me walk that back just a little bit because I had gotten, actually really early on, at least here in the States, the Novation stuff was also really, the Novation, I want to say Nova, but I feel like there was one before that.
Well, there's the base station.
Oh, yeah, the base station, yes, yeah. Yeah, so actually, my friend Rob Lowe, who you probably know Rob, Likens, Robert A. Lowe.
Yes, of course, yes.
He was in a band called the 90 Day Men, and they had gotten their hands on a bass station. I remember I saw them play at Lounge Acts maybe, or I just remember hearing it. I was like, whoa, what is that? And, it's so small, you couldn't even see it really from, if you were in the crowd or whatever, you wouldn't know what they were playing because the thing was tiny. And they showed it to me afterwards as, whoa, that is crazy. I mean, the base station was pretty big. You're right. And it was not expensive. Even back then, it was pretty affordable.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, the base station was a big one.
It's before its time, in a sense. Ironically. It was after its time, but then it was before it felt that like everyone was ready for it,
Right. It's like, who was at that point in that year? Because that would have, gosh, that's like late 90s or something.
Yeah.
Who in that year was thinking, it would be a really good idea. Let's make a synthesizer where you can only play one note at a time. And it's all analog and it's battery powered. And it's small. It's made out of plastic. Essentially, the entire Korg Volca series.
Yeah. Well, like what gets released on a monthly basis nowadays.
I know. It was crazy. That thing hit hard because it was so affordable. I definitely saw a few more base stations in floating around. And there were people running doper systems even back then. I just didn't know really what they were. But I've told the story a lot. The first modular that I saw performed on was Jim O'Rourke did a set at Lounge Acts, and he played his electronic music suitcase, is what we called it. It was actually a Doper P6 system, and I don't know exactly what was in it, but it was definitely a P6, and he had it kind of on its back on a milk crate, and he did a live set with it. But again, this is like, I didn't know Jim, so I couldn't just walk up to him and start, asking him questions. I just saw wires poking out of the top, and I saw that it was roughly the size of a suitcase. And I saw him turning knobs and playing it. And it's like, what is that? I got to figure out what that thing is. And it just took a while. I mean, that was probably 96 or so, I think. Yeah, it just took a while to figure it out. Like, what was Jim playing? And then I worked, I interned, well, whatever, sort of intern, hung around a guy who did a lot of refurb work for musicians in Chicago. His name was Soren. He was actually one of the engineers that was involved in developing the original DAT player at Sony. Very smart guy, incredible engineer.
That's wild.
And he would let me hang out in his shop and help him. Like, he would give me, like, he'd be refurbing like a console, for example. He would tell me something like, disassemble all these sliders and clean them with this solution, and then reassemble them. Like, he would just give me jobs. He never paid me. But he did teach me a lot of stuff, and he would repair my stuff for me. He would help me repair my stuff.
Okay.
So that which was really, honestly, at that time was more than enough payment, because it was hard to get stuff like that worked on. If you had like he'd help me fix the Farfisa, for example.
Yeah.
But yeah, he would have all kinds of stuff in his place, like busted up old Roland TB-303s. He had several 303s in there, and I remember this specifically because I thought later, because I'm pretty sure someone made like a new drop-in replacement for the microcontroller that's in that. There's a bunch of 303s on a stack once. I was like, what's wrong with these, Soren? He's like, oh, the computer chip went bad, the microcontroller went bad. So he's like, you can't get it anymore unless you find another one and, rob that part off of it. So they were just, he's like, you never know, someday. And he's like, they were just like a stack, like 3 or 4 of them just on a shelf somewhere. And maybe now he resurrected those at this point. But yeah, that guy was cool. He taught me a bunch of stuff about, how to use, oscilloscope, soldering iron, that kind of stuff. So I learned a lot working there. Some of the work was a little tedious. So like, at times you'd be like, oh man, wish I was getting paid for this 3 hours I spent, scrubbing down the inside of this mixing console or something. But it was cool to just learn that stuff. Some of that stuff's really hard to pick up from a book. You got to kind of just go do it.
Where were you? Where was this? Where were you based?
Oh, that was still in Chicago. Oh, so the reason, I'm sorry, I'm like just all over the place here. Stream of consciousness, memory, relapse. So the reason I mentioned that, so he had, one day when I went in, he had a doper system in there. It was a monster case, and it was full of modules. And whoa, Soren, what is that? He says, well, it's Jim O'Rourke's system, his modular system. And I said, oh, well, what's it doing here? He said, well, Jim doesn't want to play modular anymore. He doesn't want to play synthesizers anymore. He just wants to do guitar stuff. And, if you know anything about his career, he does kind of jump around like that. Like he'll do like a bunch of synthesizer stuff. Then he'll spend like 2 records making like, just like finger style guitar, like Guitar Works. And so he's like, so I bought it off him, but I'll sell it back to him. And if, when he wants it again, like he said that this had happened to him many times where, Jim decided he didn't want something anymore. So he'd buy it. And then like a year or 2 later, he'd come back. Hey, you still got that, modular synth I sold you? Yeah, it's over here. You want it back? He sold it back to him. But I didn't get to play with it because, it was Jim's, and it was like, kind of like, this is, you can't mess with that. It's his thing. I'm just holding it for him for a little while. But it was a monster case. I do remember that because it was huge.
Yeah.
Way bigger than the suitcase that he was playing on stage at Lounge Acts.
But then how do you get to Moog?
Well, that's where that's why I mentioned seeing the Voyager. I, of course, knew who Moog was. Me and my friends knew who Bob Moog was. But we didn't know that he still had a business, which is understandable because at that point it was called Big Briar. Yeah. It was just making the theremins and a few of the Mogafogers. And the history of it, how it goes, is Mike Adams had bought the company and had managed to get the name back. And I guess the story that I was always told when I worked there was that they had already built, the Voyager had been ready to go. They didn't have the Moog name. They didn't want to launch the Big Briar Voyager. They wanted to launch the Moog, Mini Moog Voyager. And they waited it out a little bit and eventually got the name back, and then it was launched. I wasn't working there at that point, but I had seen, like I said, I saw the Voyager in a music store. and like there was just nothing else like it. I mean, it was huge. Had all the panel controls. It had that strange touch surface in the center that made no sense to me. I mean, I was like, "What is this?" Which that's actually a funny story about that I learned while I was working there was that was based on a conductive paint that Bob actually mixed up himself. It was like a custom paint that he had kind of developed that was conductive, and that's how he came to. So another story related to that. Prince once called in wanting a purple Voyager, which we were willing to do, but he wanted the touch plate in the center to be purple with his logo in it.
Wow.
And they couldn't do it because they only had the only paint color was the black because it was the special paint.
Yeah, it's conductive.
And then what I was told is that he at that point, because he couldn't get it in the custom purple color with his logo printed on it, he was out. He just didn't want it.
Oh my God.
But I think he later got a Voyager anyhow. I feel like I've seen pictures of him in his studio with a Voyager.
Is that also why Moog did the little fatty in like, when the little fatty was in purple, and maybe it wasn't when you were there, but there was a little fatty in purple and green.
Yep.
And the purple one, I always thought of Prince. And I wondered if was that a concession to Prince, was just like...
Potentially. Yeah, I mean, that was, the aluminum extrusion, and you can anodize all these cool colors, and purple and green are pretty easy colors to anodize. So, they brought in a bunch of colors, black, green. I remember they had samples for all these different colors. I'm not sure why purple and green were settled on. It is kind of you would think blue and red or something would be the first choice.
Like the SH-101, but you got to differentiate yourself.
I think the Voyager led me to Moog, though, honestly. We took a camping trip down here in Western North Carolina. Oh, right. Yeah, now this story Kelly could confirm. So we flew into the Asheville airport, which is small today, but was even smaller then. And there was, the Citizen Times, which is our newspaper here. There was a Citizen Times newspaper, and the front page of it was a picture of Dr. Bob Moog. And I've just gotten off the flight. I didn't know they were in the Asheville area at the time. We were coming here to go camping in Western North Carolina. We were meeting some friends. They were going to pick us up from the airport, and we were going to drive out and go camping. And I see the newspaper. I see Bob Moog's picture. So, of course, I'm drawn to it. Like, whoa, Bob Moog's on the front page of the paper. What's going on? He had just passed away.
Oh,
he
my
passed
goodness.
away that previous evening.
2005. Yeah.
Yeah. So I flew in, saw the newspaper. Oh, Bob Moog just passed away. That's crazy. I didn't even know Bob Moog was here in Asheville. So Kelly says, oh, if Moog is still a company and they're in Asheville, maybe you should call them and see if they're ever hiring. And so I did, called him. And the salesperson there at the time, Siobhan, answered. I think she still works there.
Yeah.
And I said, are you all hiring? She says, I don't know, maybe. Let me find Lee. Lee was the production manager at the time. She goes, finds him. Well, we might be hiring. When can you come in for an interview? I'm calling from New York City. I said, well, when do you want me to come in? He's like, well, about next Wednesday. I'm like, oh, yeah, sure. Hang up. Like, literally rode a bus down to Asheville, New York, and to go to this interview. I mean, I didn't have any idea what the job was even. I didn't even know if they had a job. I was just like, hey, Moog's going to interview me. Like, I'm going down there. I don't have much money, so I'm going to drove the bus down there and stayed with my friends who lived kind of close. They were like maybe 30 minutes away in a smaller town called Marshall. And I stayed with them. They gave me a ride to the interview. And it was kind of crazy. I just wanted the job that bad. I was like, okay.
How did the interview go? What was the process?
The process was probably so different than what it is there today. So, I told them that I knew a lot of stuff that probably I wasn't lying. It was just that the reality was I didn't know as much as I thought I knew.
Yeah.
And I told them I knew how to use oscilloscopes and voltmeters. I can read schematics. Told them all this stuff. And, they took me into engineering room, and the guy that was working there at the time, Mike Pio, he pulls out a big schematic. He points to some things like, show me a summing node, show me a voltage follower, show me, and he asked me to show him all these different types of circuits. And I probably got like maybe 60% of them right. Probably a lot of stuff that he was showing me. He was like, you should know what this is if you're saying that you know how to do all the stuff that you're saying you know how to do. But I knew some of it. I just didn't know all of it. And they ended up offering me a position on the production line, building. Actually, the little fatty hadn't started getting produced yet. It was they were starting to get ready to make the little fatty. And so they offered me a position building little fatties eventually once that line got going. But that was a whole other story of like, it was like I of course, rushed right down and to start working there, and then there was tons of problems getting that line up and running, and it was a pretty wild time. You got to remember the company then was like 19 people or something like that, so it was very small. Actually, it wasn't much bigger than what Make Noise is right now.
Yeah. That's crackers. And it was selling globally at that point. The Little Fatty was...
The Little Fatty eventually did. Yeah. Little Fatty, strange. I mean, I remember so many strange things happened around the Little Fatty just because I think it was their first attempt to really make something that would be... the Voyager was available worldwide. I mean, you could get Voyagers in the UK, I'm sure. But it was still at that price point where it was kind of like what you were talking about earlier with, something like the CS80 or even like a Fairlight or a Synclavier or something like that, where it was just like a very select subset of musicians that were actually going to buy a Voyager. And a Little Fatty was supposed to be for a bunch of other musicians that wanted a Voyager but maybe weren't quite there yet. And so, yeah, it was huge. It was huge. If it gives you any indication, like the Voyager shipped 1 or 2 at a time, and the Little Fatty shipped 4 at a time. So when they would make an order up, it'd be in multiples of 4. So yeah, it was a pretty big step for the company. So I worked at Moog for about 3 years, and they started doing the Moog guitar, which is an amazing technology. It just wasn't really a product that spoke to me. I didn't do Little Fatties for very long. I eventually was the lead calibrator on the Voyager line, so I would like train people on Voyagers and stuff. But the company's small at that point, so you do jump around a lot. I also answered a lot of tech support, stuff like that. And eventually they were doing the guitar, they were gearing up to do the guitar, and I was put on that detail. I was supposed to help get the guitar line going, like the production line, I think. The guitar as a product, as an instrument, it just didn't speak to me in any way. I got kind of depressed about it. Like I liked working on Voyagers. I love the Voyagers, great instrument. I liked working on Fatties, the pedals. I loved all that stuff. It was great. The guitar just didn't speak to me. And it kind of got to this point where I had to make a decision. I was like, I just don't know. They really want me to move on to the guitar line. I know that's what they want me to do. I really can't see myself spending my days working on these things. And so I decided to leave and try to get work doing printed circuit board layout because I liked running the CAD program. I had taught myself a CAD program, and I was really enjoying making circuit boards and stuff. Being kind of the same kind of person that would leave a perfectly good job in New York City and ride a bus down to some random tiny town in Western North Carolina and apply for a job where I didn't even know if there was actually a job, what the job was, if there was one. I had no idea what it paid. I left Moog to try to become a person who developed printed circuit boards for people. Now, I had no college degree for this. I had no real experience, which I quickly found that most of these companies wanted some level of experience. Do you have a portfolio is a common question. I had no portfolio. Of course, I've already left Moog, so it's kind of done over there. It's like, oh my God, like this is, well, what did I do? I guess, that's just not the smartest choices. But in an attempt to develop a portfolio, I started trying to develop some modules that I didn't think I would sell. I just figured that these could be something that I could show someone and show them, oh, here's my work. This is a module that I designed, and I did the circuit board for it, and it works well. On my birthday, I ordered something that I just really wanted. It's not a very complicated, very simple circuit, actually. But at the time, there was no transformer and diode-based ring modulator. Doper didn't make one, in other words, because, it was either Doper or there was like 12 companies, Doper, Analog Systems. Plan B had done the oscillator, which was incredible. And then Mike Brown had done a couple of his modules. I think the AFG had come out because we worked out a deal. We traded Mike he wanted a Little Fatty, and me and a couple other folks who were working at Moog at that time traded him some AFGs for Little Fatties. And actually my AFG is signed by Mike, which is kind of cool.
Oh, that's really
and
amazing.
it has the yellow circuit boards, which was like the first ones he did. Yeah.
Damn, I had one of those. Not signed, but I had one with
AFG rules. It's such a cool. It's huge, and people would say, "Well, it's so big for what it does." It's like, well, but what it does is pretty awesome.
It's pretty big sounding, right?
It's huge, right? Exactly. It sounds like more than one VCO sometimes.
Yeah.
just like there's okay, well, this doesn't really exist, so I'm gonna make one. And for my birthday, I had saved up some cash and I ordered enough to make 20. My idea was I'll make 20 of these and I'll sell 18 of them and keep 2. And this will be kind of like me trying to like start something. And that was it. So I tried to sell the 18, and thankfully Matrix Synth picked up the photo. I made this little video for it too, which is still on our YouTube page. And Matrix Synth picked it up, and all 18 sold like really fast. Again, I mean, you got to understand, like today, there's not much of a thirst for a simple ring modulator like that. But at the time, it was just like, no, there was nothing else that really sounded like this. So people who were into Eurorack were excited. It's like, oh, whoa, this is something different that isn't in the Doper catalog. I want it. So I sold the 18 like really fast. And then I got asked to play at All Tomorrow's Parties. Actually, you probably know All Tomorrow's Parties.
Mm.
Yeah, at Butlin's.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's again, not because I was anybody, but just because I knew somebody who really liked my music, who was somebody, basically. It was, I think it was either Dirty 3 or Explosions in the Sky. So we were over there playing, and then we stayed and we were hanging out, I was, it's just to give you an idea, like when this was, remember internet cafes where it'd be like a laundromat, and then there'd be like computers that you could like rent out to like check your email? So I was like, I haven't checked my email in like weeks. I've been like here in Europe doing this All Tomorrow's Parties, and then Kelly and I were having fun like in Italy. And I go to this internet cafe and like whatever, pay my like however many euros to get like 15 minutes of time to check my email. And in my inbox is this email from Sean Cleary, and it's saying, I'd like to buy 50 of your mod demods. That's it. It was like very short, like, let me know what the price is and when you can, get them to me. It's like, whoa, what? 50? God, this is insane. Like my mind is just like racing. Like, 50, that's some money. Okay, that's cool. But wait, how do I build 50 of these things? That's a lot to build. Okay, well, I don't really have a job, so I guess that could be good. So I emailed back. I'm like, yes, I can build you 50. And I like came up with a price off the top of my head, like pretty random, like no business sense whatsoever. Wow. Probably way less than I should have charged. Cool. And then I like threw out a date that was, again, also quite random. I can have these ready for you in this amount of time. And of course, it was actually like really like a ridiculous amount of work that I hadn't really anticipated. And the other thing was he didn't want the black panels, because I had done the black and gold panel. He didn't want that. He's like, we don't use black panels in Eurorack, so you got to get silver panels. Here's where you can get them. And it wasn't Metal Photo of Cincinnati yet even. It was this other company that was doing them. They wouldn't drill holes, so you had to punch your own panels. So like, found like an old metal punch and punched them all and stuff. Yeah.
Manually. Great.
Right. So anyhow, I'm coming around to the format jumbler, I swear. This is the most roundabout. I'm not usually this cloudy. I feel like you're drawing this out of me. But yeah, so the 50, I delivered him the 50 mods eventually, and he paid me quickly, which was just astonishing. It was like, wow, like I can't believe like I sold these and like made this money. That's incredible. It's an incredible feeling, It's like I did this thing and then like someone bought it. Being a musician, trying to be a musician most of my life up to that point, you're like walking around the club after the set trying to get people to buy your CD or something, and they can't be bothered. It's like so hard, to make money as a musician. I mean, I still remember that to this day. Like the amount of satisfaction you have from selling, like say you sold 10 CDs at a gig. I mean, you're just like, oh my God, I sold 10 CDs. This is an incredible feeling, And so this was kind of like that same kind of feeling. I did something. Somebody wanted it and they bought it, and they bought a lot of them. Like, this is an incredible feeling. Okay, like, cool, what's next? So I emailed him. I was like, hey, like, I have these other modules I'm making, and I'm, what else should I make? And, it's just, things were just different then because there's just no one else making stuff. And he says, well, Doper has a low pass gate, but, it doesn't really have that Buchla sound. And, so can you make something like that? I had no idea. I was like, yes, of course, absolutely. And so that kind of like led me back to that Buchla path again. But that was a long path. At that point, it wasn't all the knowledge that there is on the forums now, where it's like, this is the Vactrol you want. Here's the original circuit. This is what you need to do to make it work. All this stuff that's documented really well now wasn't documented. So it led me down this path of trying to figure out like, well, what does the low pass gate even sound like? It's like, well, I can't get one. Like, I'm not going to just find a music easel hanging out. Okay, like I got to figure this out. So, talking to a lot of people, trying to scrounge up circuits, pictures of the old, the actual modules inside and out, all that kind of stuff. That was all taking a lot of time. In the meantime, I needed some quick cash. So I said to Sean, what else? Is there something else I can make that's like really fast and easy? Just keep me going. He says, well, actually, a lot of people getting in the Eurorack already have Serge systems or Buchla systems. They need a way to interface, but it can't be expensive. It needs to be cheap. And all right, I'm doing it. That's a format jumbler. This is basically him saying he has these customers that have Serge systems or Moog modular systems, and they want Eurorack. They want that wild new Eurorack thing, which wasn't really that wild at that point, but it was more wild maybe than the Serge system they've been playing for the last 20 years. Some of these people, his customers, they never stopped playing modular. They had the modules when they came out in the 70s and the 80s. They kept playing them all through the 90s. They were just not as popular. And so, I made the format jumblers basically on his request. Obviously, he didn't ask for it to look as wacky as it did, but it wasn't any choice. He didn't really.
We should talk about panel design as sort of like, I guess the module that intrigues me the most is maths, of course, your most notorious module. Tell me the story of making it. How did you come up with it? And particularly that dang panel. Like, how did you design your panels? Or how do you?
Right. Okay. Yeah. So the module, Doper had the quad AR generator, which was really cool. That was a really awesome module, but was kind of big, admittedly, and could be a little bit unruly to use because there was so much there. Bananalog. The guy Seth ran Bananalog. He had the SVS. That's an original one right there.
Yeah. I just was like, I thought this was to my side, but I have an very original red math.
That's cool.
I don't know. It's like 185. Was it 28? No, it's 581. I don't know what that signifies. Is that literally the 581st?
Yeah. Yes. It
literally is just sequential numbering on them.
Yeah. Just seemed, I don't know much about that kind of stuff. So I just wrote numbers on the back so I'd know like if it was, which one it was. I mean, now we have like a whole system of tracking stuff that smart people have come up with. And if you buy a module and you have a problem with it, we can look at like what production run that module came out of, who calibrated it, who built it. All that stuff is documented to where we can find it, which is super helpful for tracking down problems, bigger problems. If you don't have that kind of detail, stuff can just start going wrong, and you're just trying random crap. You're just throwing stuff at the wall until something fixes it. But if you have that knowledge, you can kind of pinpoint. We're dealing with a problem right now where we had a fail that, and it's something we've been building for 4 or 5 years. Suddenly, this big run of fails, and we were able to track down that we're not totally certain, but we're pretty certain it was actually a bad batch of capacitors, and none of these have gone out into the field yet. They've been being held, but I think because it's all like tracked so tightly, like those units have been quarantined and like. We've been working, like trying to figure out what's going on with them. Like that kind of stuff is pretty nice when you're making stuff for more than like 50, 100 people. Otherwise, you can end up with like people having like a lot of stuff that doesn't work. So yeah, back then it was just me. So I was just like, it's number 581. That's it. Couldn't tell you any other details about that. I couldn't tell you the data manufacturer or anything.
There isn't much on it. I can't remember if there's even like a little phrase on the edge. Sometimes you've got like little...
Yeah. I think there is one on that.
Is there? What is the phrase? Hang on. The phrase is, "Hi, Mom."
Oh, right. Of course.
That's the oldest and best. Yeah, this is dated 2009. I got this from Schneider's Laden.
Yeah, the second dealer that we ever added.
Yeah.
Like he's talking about next steps after Sean's bought some stuff. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Well, if I want this to be my job, I need to find someone else to sell it to. Andreas Schneider.
Yeah, God bless him.
He was the second guy. Yeah, no, right. People don't realize like for Europeans for a while, everybody was just going to Berlin. Like you're in the UK, you were ordering stuff from Berlin. because there just wasn't any dealers yet until the fellow who just, I think, oh my gosh.
Post Modular.
Post Modular. I was going to say Modular Post Modular. Yeah, he was a really early dealer for us as well. I remember he contacted me maybe a few months after Schneider, maybe a little longer. Great. Unfortunately, I don't think I've ever gotten a chance to meet him, but he was always a nice person to deal with over email.
He was. I met him. I went to his house. I can't remember what I bought.
Where he sold stuff from. I
bought a module and I literally went to his house in like South London. He had a lovely house, lovely person. And he took me over to a cupboard and sort of opened it up. And it was a bit like, in retrospect, it was a bit like going to Ollivander's one shop in Harry Potter, because it wasn't, he's got quite long hair. And there's a sort of old English vibe to it. And then, he just like turns around, pulls out the cardboard box, and there's your bond, sir. But it's,
I remember him telling me that he was storing this stuff. Like, he's like, I've got it everywhere. It's under my bed, it's in cupboards and stuff. Yeah, it was yeah.
I didn't get that tour. It was just the cupboard. But so also it says "Long Live Rise" on the PCB, right in the corner. It says "Long Live Rise."
Long Live Rise. Oh wait. Oh, actually, that might be a reference to Kelly ran a program at Warren Wilson College called Rise. It was a program that addressed sexual assault on campus. Yeah, that's probably what that is. Probably a reference to her. At that point, she was working at the college. She taught a couple of classes and ran that program. Yeah, that's definitely what that is.
Yeah, it's nice to know. There's kind of like, there's a humanity to things like that where you see little references and cheeky jokes, things that are all like, human references on equipment is not something that's not a part of any other subset of music technology. I think it would be fair to say. Not even, luthier guitarists will put sort of funny comments and sort of references. There's a kind of cheekiness to the sort of the world of Eurorack that kind of, I don't know, it feels unique. I don't know, other than like, I suppose, computer game design and coding, there's a kind of
Easter eggs.
You'll get Easter eggs, basically. But I've never bought music equipment that had Easter eggs except for Eurorack.
I remember popping open my Pro 1 that I would have had like in the 90s or early 2000s. I had a Pro 1 and popping it open. There was some cool stuff on that circuit board. I feel like there was like an image of like a Hindu god or something like that.
Yeah.
It was strange. It was really, it was kind of cool. There was like a bunch of cool stuff inside of there. There's some phrases and stuff written on it too, I remember.
There's definitely, I've seen somewhere there's like mushrooms and things on like, and obviously Seat Lombard stuff is.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Wild, like
that's
wild.
The circuit board as art, essentially.
Yeah, literally.
You know what it might be is that Eurorack, because the modules, they come out of the enclosure, so you're more likely to look at the circuit board than you are like if you bought like an OB6. I mean, you're probably not going to open that thing up unless you have to. But maybe if you open it up, you might see some funny stuff in there. Who knows? So
then tell me about maths. My understanding of it is that you were kind of messing with like DUTFA modules and were like, there were combos that you enjoyed. I mean, but obviously it's Surge DUSG as well. So
that was the one I was trying to remember. The Bananalog made a Surge type envelope generator. And so I had set up, I bought two of those, or traded rather, to Sean for modules, two of those, and then a dope for polarizing mixer. I don't know if you remember that one. And so that was a really cool combination for like running them both, or maybe not even both as LFOs. Maybe one's an LFO, one's triggered, and then mixing them, adding them, subtracting them and stuff. And I just came up with a lot of cool control voltages that way. So to me, it kind of made sense to make one module that kind of had two simple envelope generators that could be combined in complex ways. And I kind of saw it as being like a sort of hub where like a bunch of control voltages would go in and fresh, new, different ones would come out.
What was the prototyping process? Like how many iterations do you go through before you end up at the lightning bolt, the final design?
I got some tips from some people, like Grant Richter kind of explained to me like how the core worked and how it was sort of loosely related to the gain cell that's using like a lot of the DBX stuff. So like there's 4 transistors in that core that kind of control the current into the integrator. And that was kind of like a mystery to me until Grant had mentioned something about how its configuration was loosely based off of this DBX circuit, which DBX circuit was widely available at that point. And so I had found that and kind of like kludged something together that was working pretty good. But the problem initially was that if you had it set for too long of a rise, it would latch up, which is kind of a common thing in analog electronics. You can have things latch up. So it would reach the highest point and it would just get stuck there and it wouldn't fall back down again. And so that was probably the biggest challenge with that thing, was making it not latch up. But because I also wanted to be able to cycle for a really long time, like as long as I could possibly get. And the one kind of cool thing about this little current control circuit was that the resolution was really good all the way down to like, zero essentially. So like you could really just barely like drip current into the integrator. So it really could go really, really slow. But for some reason, it would always latch up. And so that was the big challenge, figuring out how to make this thing not latch up so that people could run it for like a 25-minute cycle and have it still eventually make its way back down again. And that took me a while. That took not very many iterations of the board, because I was just cobbing stuff onto the circuit board, because it's a pretty simple circuit. It's not a complicated circuit. I do remember that Sean, he was the person who told me to make what became the quad multimode gate, obviously, and that was a big hit. And although it was way underpriced, especially since I was hand building them initially, it just was impossible to. I mean, the amount of hours I spent building the first 65 was incredible. So I sent him a mass prototype early on, and he just said he didn't think it would be something that could sell. He didn't think it was worth pursuing. Kind of pointed to the Doper module I had mentioned, the quad AR, and then also the banana log module I had mentioned. He said, look, I've got loads of these things on my shelf. I cannot get rid of them. They're too complicated. People don't want that kind of envelope. And but I didn't listen to him, because I thought this thing was kind of cool. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to make some anyhow, and you can buy a few if you want. And Schneider says he'll buy a few. So, whatever, I'll make like 100, and, and I'll sell them eventually. And so I did. And it was, I think, kind of slow at first. I honestly don't know how it caught on so well. Honestly, I really don't know. Maybe it was the lightning bolts on the faceplate. I don't know. It just caught on, and in retrospect, I'm thinking it seemed kind of slow, but because I was still trying to make quad multimode gates at that point too, and those just took a long time. Because even after I started having them made at a shop where they put the components down, I still had to select the Vactrols and solder them in. It's 8 Vactrols, so it was still kind of a lot of work for one person, all the while trying to make the other stuff. So I don't know. Seems like it caught on pretty slow to me. And I never even made a video for it that I remember. We still don't have that many dedicated math videos in our catalog. We have a huge catalog of videos that make noise. Last I checked, over 200. Yeah. And there's not a single dedicated math video that I can think of. Kind of weird.
I guess other people made them for you.
I think that's what happened, is like people started kind of chatting about it and talking about it and sharing tips and tricks, and they would email them into me, and I would add them to the manual they would think, they were like, that's cool, thanks for adding that to the manual or whatever. Just, yeah. Sometimes I think I tried to credit people. Sometimes they wouldn't want to be credited, or they'd be like, I don't know if I invented this, so don't credit me for it, but it's a cool patch, here it is. And I would add it to the manual. And so the manual grew over time as well. Maybe the manual was part of it. I tried to write a really good manual for it, because at that time, manuals in Eurorack were pretty slim. Like a single, little postcard size piece of paper that came with a module. Figure it out on your own. It was basically the general attitude. And then I made a digital, a PDF manual that was a few pages. So maybe that helped.
It needs a manual, of course. But yeah, it's a difficult one. I feel like it's word of mouth. The forum now known as Modwiggler, that's where things were discovered and talked about and sort of shouted about. And at the time, right. I mean, I remember this was when I was kind of getting into Eurorack, and I remember lusting after the QMMG. There's an era where there's just kind of, it's like a hazy, wonderful time where there's sort of, there's only a few companies and you were one of them.
Right.
And then there's this explosion. It feels like you guys were lighting the touch paper, and then it was just kind of whoom. And then,
right.
I don't know how it got exponential, but it really did. It did. You turned your fully clockwise, and it became exponential. And I don't know what that was like. I mean, how did maths sell? Obviously, it picked up. At what point were you like, crap, this is my full-time job now. This is a full business. I need help. I have to hire people.
It's weird. Like, I think I have some smarts when it comes to like how to talk about stuff or like how to get someone excited about something. But when it comes to like actually organizing a business, I am not good. So, I mean, I probably should have hired people 2 years sooner than I did. I had this one woman who would come out and work. She was actually a student at the college where Kelly worked, and she needed a job. So she would put panels on and knobs on and stuff. And that was the only help I had for quite some time. And then Kelly decided that she wanted to stop working at the college. And she said that she would work with me. She would help me build stuff or whatever. And so at that point, there was a mod that needed to be done on the Renee. And so I taught her kind of how to solder and stuff. She picked it up pretty quick. She's got a steady hand. So that's really the key to soldering. And we set up a station outside on the front stoop, and she soldered like the Renee mods. And I guess that was like the next real employee. I mean, Heather came and worked 3-4 days a week. But yeah, she just didn't do any quality control or anything. She just put knobs on and faceplates on. Yeah. So, Kelly, yeah. So she modeled all those Renees, and she was helping me stamp boxes and all that kind of stuff. And I think at some certain point, she just decided she didn't want to go back to working at the college and decided to work with Make Noise. I mean, there's a lot of other stuff. But anyhow, long story short is that she's the one who kind of said, look, we need to get some other people to help us with this stuff. And we need to find a space for it, because it had taken over like 2 rooms in the house. We were building stuff at the kitchen table, kind of, it just taken over the house. And so she had kind of decided like, need to have a real go at this. Rent a space, can hire a couple people. So at that point, we hired a guy, Dash, actually, who just put out a really good record. His artist name is Gardner. And Here for a Moment is the name of the record. A really good record. It's on Spotify, Bandcamp, well worth checking out. But yeah, he was, I think, the first properly hired employee. Like, okay, you're going to work at Make Noise, and we're going to show you how to calibrate a DPO. I think that was what we were building by that point. But so that was all. Yeah, Kelly just basically saying like, this is ridiculous. You're working too much. You're doing like 7 days a week, 10-hour days or something, and we need to get some people to help you. Yeah. And so yeah, that's when it really started feeling like. I mean, even like the first NAMM show I ever did, I remember feeling like, oh, maybe this is a real business. Years ago, I had a conversation with Grant Richter when I was trying to get him to license me the Wogglebug design, and I was trying to pay him for it, and I said. And he said, well, if you were a real business, I would charge you a big licensing fee, but you're just you're just making some synthesizers. I said, well, what's a real business? And he says, well, I don't know. He came up with a number. I don't know where he came with this number. I remember this number though. He said, I don't know. A real business makes at least $250,000 a year. You're making $250,000 a year? I was like, no. He's like, okay, well, that's what I mean. You're not, it's just, you're just making some synthesizers for fun. I mean, which was reasonable and probably true. I think if I were really looking at it, I probably wasn't paying myself, even minimum wage at that point. So he was probably right. But he did let me make the Wogglebug, and I did end up paying him a licensing fee. And then, we also did the Rix Mix, which was based off of a design idea that he published. I don't think he never made anything with that circuit. So he was pretty excited to see that come to life, actually, because it was like the first actual physical hardware version of that circuit that someone could buy. So we licensed that from him too. Regarding
like designs, thinking about things like that, how do you approach designs? What point do you know that something is worth building?
I think, I think this kind of comes back around to why I have acquired so many instruments. I feel like, early on, it was all just mystery, and it was all chasing this sort of like this dream, and I talk about this all the time, like staring at photos of the old Buchla stuff and just wondering, like, what does this sound like? What does this knob do? What does that knob do? What comes out of this jack? How would you patch this? It was all just complete mystery to me. Even though I do reference Don Buchla all the time, and people would always associate, especially the early designs, as being, having that lineage back to the Buchla instruments. At the end of the day, the reality is that we were just, I was at least just making it up based on like my dream of what the buchla sounded like, or my dream of what it would be like to play a 259 oscillator, for example. And so now, though, going into the future, I feel like what's more important is to have actually played a lot of these instruments and have like real experiences with them, so that you can kind of learn where the magic lie and kind of be able to recognize when you find that magic in the future. And I feel like that's true of any art. Like, for example, with music, I mean, especially today, it's so easy to make music. It's so easy to record it, arrange it, all that stuff. The steps they've been streamlined to the point of I mean, if you wanted to make a track in an hour, I mean, there's even that program that Fact does, on the clock, where someone makes a track in like 10 minutes or something. But the reality is, when you've actually done something that's brilliant, and it doesn't happen that often. You got to be honest with yourself. Every musician, this isn't just you or me, it's any musician that you really, really start talking to, like a musician that you really respect. And they don't just go into the studio and make brilliance every day, all day. They toil. They record hundreds of songs before they get that one that you hear. And so I feel like it's the same is true with designing good instruments. You can't just make something because you can make it. I mean, there's no sense in that. Everything's already there. We already have more than what we would ever need. We have more musical instruments than we could ever possibly consume in a lifetime. So if you're going to bother making something new, you should make sure that it's incredible, that it's completely just going to knock someone over. It has to. There's no reason to make it otherwise. Otherwise you're just adding to tomorrow's landfill. To some degree, you could really kind of look at what Make Noise is doing. We're making fewer new things as time progresses. People would notice this. Someone looked at early on, we'd launched 3, 4, even 5 modules in a year. Now maybe 1 or 2. And is it because we're shrinking? No, we're growing. We're a bigger company. We have more employees. We're shipping more products, so to speak, than we were back then. But it's just, I think for me, just kind of feel like reached this point where I'm just not interested in doing something that is anything less than astonishing to me. Like if I play it and I feel like magic, and that's like with the Strega, I still play. I've been playing with Strega for 2 years now because I was developing it. I spent a whole summer playing it before anyone even knew the name. But I played it just last night. I sit down and play that thing, and just every time I touch it, it's magic. So I like that. And that's what you gotta chase. The stuff that you don't even completely understand why it works, but it does work. Whatever it is, art, music, circuits, unless you're trying to design something to do a very specific job, like make some sort of feedback suppressor for a live performance environment. Obviously, that needs to just do the thing of suppressing PA system feedback. But you might come up with a really novel approach to that, and that could change that game too. I mean, there's plenty of creativity to be had in those jobs as well.
So I guess then, what is your favorite design? What has been your favorite thing to design? Taking that process in mind.
I guess maybe just because it's on my mind, but I really enjoyed doing the Strega with Alessandro. It was really, it was very free form. There was no schedule. There was no concern about will this be something that people will like, or it was just, I mean, we did try to keep it, we wanted to keep it somewhat affordable. We didn't want to turn into some $4,000, end all be all instrument. So we knew we had a price in mind, but that's really the only thing we had guiding us. A price was trying to keep it within this budget so that it could be something that a lot of people could experience. And I realize it's not cheap. I get that, but it's also not crazy expensive. So I do think it's within reach for a lot of musicians out there, that's something that both he and I really wanted. But otherwise, it was just free form. It was kind of like me interpreting his artistic output and him kind of pointing at things and saying yes and no, and this should go more in that way, and this should go more that way. And it was very, it was fun. It was fun to kind of collaborate in that way. So probably the Strega is a recent memory that was pretty fun to develop.
Did you have a brief? I mean, was there even did you have an initial meeting where you say, we need to make an ambient industrial instrument, or is it just we need to make an instrument?
It's just we need to make an instrument, and it needs to be, it had to be informed by his approach to music. I was already a fan of his music, so I've already listened to all his music. I mean, I've even, I was listening even back when he was still singing on the records, like Mod Will Mod and these things. So I had kind of witnessed his progression into what he is now. Seen him perform live many times. I know the instruments that he really likes. I spent a lot of time in the studio with him pointing to things and showing me what's good about this. I remember once he showed me this noise source. He said, "This is the best noise source." He turns on this, it's an old Buchla 100 module. And he's like, "Show me this noise source." And it's basically a noise source that's broken. It's like randomly, kind of intermittently picking up radio stations and like cutting out. And like, it's actually like a terrible noise source for all practical purposes. Like it's just, you wouldn't want to use it if you wanted like a white noise source. This is not your game. This thing was like totally busted. That just cracked me up. This is the best one. There's something you can take away from that, like that's okay. Yeah, I get it. Like this is the best noise source because there's probably no other noise source quite like this one. So
yeah,
right there, that's like a starting point.
It definitely, the Strega feels that way. Like I remember playing with it before, I think I had a manual when you guys sent it to me and it was to try. And I remember I like took it out, the unique experience, which is very, very fun, like, which I'm very privileged to have, where I got to see it for the first time, not on the internet, not on like a leak or on a rumor. I took it out of the box and I was like, here it is, fully formed and complete and done. So I was like, uniquely like first-hand experiences for a very digital world. And I remember initially playing with it and being like, oh, wow, like, is this broken? Like, is it meant to sound like this? Like, because it's different. Although it looks like the No Coast, it looks like the No Control, I feel that it's not like them in many ways. It's very much the ugly duckling is not the right phrase because it's not ugly, but it's the black sheep. It's the
broken. I love it. Yeah.
But it is like it, but it's wild and different. Whereas I feel the No Coast and the No Control are very precise and deliberate. Whereas it feels like the Strega has got this intentionally kind of, it's free form. It feels like there's kind of, it's not designed to be a precise instrument in the way that those other ones are. Like, and the Strega feels like you're kind of, like you've got some weird Soviet radio and you're tuning into kind of distant broadcasts from the past that have been buried in the soil for 100 years.
Right.
What I just struggle to understand is how if you haven't got a design brief, how can you arrive at how do you know it's done?
Yeah. I think intuition. I think in my mind, I kind of imagined what would be an instrument that would excite him, what would be an instrument where he would be able to use it. I mean, I guess the only design brief was eventually we settled on putting it in the same enclosure as a Zero Coast just because, well, I said, there'll be some cost savings there because we can use the same enclosure. So that'll help us like keep the price more reasonable. These are things, it's kind of boring to think about, but there are things that can help, and in some ways that's why one of the reasons why Eurorack has excelled so much at bringing really strange, unique ideas into the world of synthesis is exactly that. So most of these strange things that people are cooking up in the world of Eurorack could never exist as like a standalone completed hardware instrument because the cost would not be effective. Not enough people would buy the thing to make it worth the amount of money it would take to develop the enclosure and all the other supporting elements. But because you have this empty case that supports them, it's like people can just throw all sorts of crazy ideas behind a panel. They don't have to worry about a power supply. They don't have to worry about an enclosure. They don't have to worry about some of the basic stuff. Like, think about like any circuit needs, even when you get into digital synthesis, you still need LFOs, envelopes. You still need all the stuff to make the cool circuit work. Like a morphogene, that's what one of the most common things people write in. They're a guitar player. They really want a morphogene. Is there any way we would just make a box that would let them just have a morphogene? I said, well, no, that wouldn't really work because you're going to want like at least an LFO, random voltage generator. You're going to want these other supporting circuits around it. This is a very hard thing for people who aren't in the modular to get, to understand. But like I said, coming back around to that, like because that person they don't have to bring the LFO in, the envelopes, all the other things. They can just do their one small little crazy idea and put that out into the world, and boom, it can work. That's the brilliant thing about the whole Eurorack market, is that you can make any crazy idea can be brought to life. And there's really nothing else like it has ever existed. I mean, modular existed before, but it was just a few select companies that were making complete systems. And people weren't building like mixed Buchla, Serge, Moog systems. No, they might have had. There's probably someone out there who had all three, but they weren't mixing them like that. You know, what we're seeing today is it's very unique to anything. Even the pedals. The pedals are cool, and you can mix and match them on the pedal board, but they don't necessarily talk to each other. They don't support each other necessarily. They operate as independent little circuits. Modular, you know, my math module might bring to life a module that IntelliGel made. But if IntelliGel had put that thing out as a standalone device, they would have had to come up with all the other support circuitry. It might have never seen the light of day. But they have the idea to do something like that Planck, for example. Pretty strange circuit, pretty strange thing to do. How could you sell enough of those to make that a standalone synthesizer? Probably not. But as a module, it's great. It can exist next to all the other modules, and it can be a part of that ecosystem. Kind of a special thing.
I think there's something very beautiful in the fact that, as you're describing it, you realize that all these modular companies prop each other up.
To some degree, absolutely.
The existence of IntelliGel helps make noise, helps, Dupfer, helps you're all buoying each other up, because your existence, it really is the rising tide, floats all, helps all ships.
I think that is true. It took me a while to realize that, but it just became more and more true as time passed. Initially, like each new company that would announce, be like, oh no, another competitor.
Oh, no. Yeah.
Like, how are we going to stay in business? Another one. And then after a while, it just kind of became this thing of like, oh, okay, well, I mean, this is clearly working. It's not a problem. And in fact, I just started noticing, I'm like, well, I mean, maybe the person that gets the Instruyo module isn't buying, maybe they get the Instruyo oscillator. They're not buying the Make Noise oscillator, but maybe they're still buying like the Make Noise Echo or whatever. People are mix and matching so much that it's like, it just ends up kind of being a wash, honestly. It's not really that scary anymore. Now, I mean, obviously there's probably more companies in the market that can sustain. It's kind of crazy, but it's not as scary as it once was, where you're thinking, oh, wow, should I bother ordering more Echo phones? These people made an Echo now. Is everyone just going to buy that Echo? They're not going to buy Echo phones anymore. I'm going to hold off on ordering Echo phones. I don't think I can sell anymore. Yeah, these are thoughts that I would have like on a regular basis.
Yeah, it's difficult to know if Eurorack is growing. Is there any way that we can tell how many Eurorack users there are on Earth, and are there more?
No real way. I know some people look to Modular Grid. The problem with Modular Grid is that everybody has, like, people who don't have Eurorack systems build stuff on Modular Grid. Someone who has like a small Eurorack system might have built like 5 different systems on Eurorack Grid. So some people think the number of maths that are out there is directly correlated to the number of the ones on Modular Grid. And it's just, well, no, people are building like potential systems and they're throwing stuff in it. So you don't have any idea of like who actually owns any of the systems that are on Modular Grid. But geez, I mean, Modular Grid, there's something. I mean, my gosh, I mean, it's kind of incredible. Like, you can mock up systems and like all the information is there, and like,
what a useful, yeah. What was the one that was before it? I've now forgotten what it was called. I keep trying to, do you remember the one where it was like a kind of, it was a basic web interface?
Yeah. It didn't get taken as far as Modular Grid did, but there was one, yeah.
I remember putting to my early systems that had like this little fella in, and it was a happy time. I suppose it's the one question I had about that, I think, and you kind of touched on it a bit. And actually, funny enough, we emailed about this, because when I put up that herb verb, there was that video on Tom Herb making, his lecture he had a lecture about the herb verb. So developing the herb verb and, reverb design, really fascinating topic. And I remember at the end of it, he gave a kind of rough like cost calculation for the herb verb. And he was like, oh, this is kind of what it costs us to make, and this is what we make on it. And I remember I sent it to you. I was like, do you mind this going out? Like, he's giving some information about the cost of your module. And I was really interested by your response, because I live on both sides of the fence. I think people don't appreciate the amount of extra things that have to be factored into the cost of something as simple as a module. And it's really easy to think that like when a maths is, this tiny little PCB and a bit of paneling could cost the same thing as a complete synthesizer from a big mass market manufacturer. I guess a customer looks at that and goes, that doesn't make any sense. Mm-hmm. Tony, you're taking me for a ride. So what do you say to that, to those people who maybe don't understand? Can you help them understand why these things cost what they cost?
Yeah, it is really hard. I mean, it's sort of like when you get into these folks that will cite like the cost of a bomb as being the cost of a product.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not really the case unless, I guess in some cases it is if you're just DIYing something. You didn't have to spend the time and money to develop it. Somebody made a project and you bought the bomb and built it. Yeah. Oftentimes those people aren't even accounting for their own time though in building it and debugging it. So yeah, I mean, it is really hard. I think the key is to focus on the fact that it's a totally different instrument. And really that $300 synthesizer that you're talking about, I don't know which one you're talking about, but there's many of them.
It's a speculative one, yeah.
It's likely that it probably does a lot more than the maths. It's also likely that it's based off of a single DSP IC and has one stereo out. That's it. Some black and white keys, maybe a couple of knobs. So it's a different user experience. Modular, even though Eurorack made modular much more affordable than it has ever been, it is still a luxury format. It is the most high-end version of synthesis that you can get into. That's all there is to it at this point. Do you need it? I mean, no, you don't need any of it. You don't need any of this. I mean, people make beautiful music with a laptop and Pure Data, which is a free software. But that's besides the point. I mean, that's not the world that we live in. You also don't need to eat pizza. There's no reason to eat pizza. You don't need what's in pizza or hamburgers. You don't need beer. You don't need any of these things, but you want them because they make life beautiful and enjoyable. So that's essentially what modular is. It is luxury. And yes, mass doesn't do that much compared to that synthesizer that is $300 and can make beats and all the other things, But can we make it cheaper? Potentially we could make mass cheaper if we were able to secure a level of orders to where we would be able to, rather than purchasing them in the quantities that we purchase, if we could say, for example, quadruple or more, our order quantities. So instead of building them, it used to be 100 at a time, then it jumped up to 200, then it's 500. Now these days it's you make a module, you make 1,000, which seems like a lot to me, but if you go to a company like Korg, they don't do things in that number. They're not going to make 1,000 of something. That's just not how their business operates. So if there was a way, if at some point we decided we just want to grow this thing and we're going to go big, and we go to a big dealer, whatever, Sweetwater or whatever the equivalent is over there, and say, we need to lock you down to purchase 20,000 of these things, which they would never do. No, nobody's ever going to purchase that many. And then at that point, we would be able to quote it. And we'd be able to acquire all the parts in greater quantities. And we'd be able to find areas where we could figure out how to build it cheaper. That's all very possible. You could build it for less money. Absolutely. But it's just not there. There's no way we can do that. Mm. We can't, and nor do I want to. I have no interest in building in those. I don't have any interest in getting into that level of the game. I don't want to sell those kind of numbers. That's like a growth that I just don't want. I kind of like where making noises now. I like the size that it is. It's big enough. It's too big to me sometimes. Sometimes it freaks me out. I wish it was smaller. But, it's also, I'm not going to complain. It's a good job to have. Everyone who works there is happy working there, which makes me happy too. So, yeah, I guess the long way of saying is yes, you could make it cheaper, but it's just not something that is really possible in a realistic way. Instruments that sell a lot, like a ukulele, they made ukuleles so cheap now. It's because they make hundreds of thousands of ukuleles a year. So many people have a ukulele sitting in their house. Not that many people have a modular synthesizer in their house. The reality, we think it is a lot because we're friends with a lot of people who have them. So we're like, everybody has a modular. It's like, well, everyone has a modular because that's something that you're into. But the reality is not that many. In the world, not that many people have a modular compared to something like a guitar or a piano or any number of band instruments, flutes, trombones, trumpets, these things.
Not even close.
Not even close.
Modular ukulele, though. Got me thinking there. Maybe that's a plonk patch. I mean, yeah. All right, so I have only 2 more questions. What do you say is the future of make noise? And then what is the future of music technology?
Ooh.
So maybe those 2 things could be interrelated, I'm sure.
No, they absolutely are, I hope. I keep thinking about, there's this whole period where computers emulated everything. And they're still emulating. They're still getting better at it. You look at things like the UAD plugins. UAD plugins can emulate, like say, for example, like a Neve mic pre, but people still buy Neve mic pre's. So then I guess that's where I started getting. Initially, they weren't very good at it. Do you remember Software Rebirth?
Very much so. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I thought it was awesome. It was super fun. I loved like the look of it, the skins. People could make their own skins. It was really fun. But many people in the electronic music community didn't feel like it sounded as good as like the real thing, right? And admittedly, it was pretty early, so it probably didn't. I mean, I didn't have a 303 to compare it to, but it probably didn't because it was super, super early. I mean, pioneering software, really. And now it's like, as we move forward, it's like even Roland is making digital emulations of their own 303. So it's like kind of, at this point, the digital is caught up. I mean, people are making digital things that sound really good, but people still want analog things. So it's like, I don't know, that didn't really go the way I thought it would. I kind of, like early on, I kind of felt like there was this especially even starting Make Noise, I was like, they could do this for a little while. This probably won't last. This is like a 5-6 year pattern. Here I'm like, whatever, 15, 16 years in now, like, oh, okay, well, maybe it's more than that. So yeah, that's where music tech is kind of confusing because even though it's all gone digital and it's all been emulated, people still want I'm going to say real thing, which might offend people who write computer software, but people still want the physical analog thing, I guess I'll say. So that's a really hard thing to explain. People are still buying vinyl records, even though you can listen to any record you could think of. You could do a search, and if it's not on Spotify, you're probably going to find it on YouTube, and you can play it. But then people are still buying vinyl records. So that's where human beings are really it's so hard to predict, Like it's all there. You don't need to take up all that space on your shelf with all the records. You don't need to lug those records from apartment to apartment. They're heavy as hell. Why do you still have all those records? All your music is here. You can listen to it anytime. Way more convenient. Doesn't weigh as much. They're still buying them. Vinyl is so backed up right now that a lot of record labels are trying to get artists to make CDs instead because they can make CDs like that. Vinyl is so backed up, they can't get records. They can't make them. There's too many people want records, right? And, initially your thought would be like, oh, the future of music technology is in AI and machine learning and we're going to have a filter that's going to guess where you want the resonance to be. Like, no. Not in my lifetime, that's for sure. The future of music is probably going to keep looking a lot like the past. And it's going to be more variations on what's already happened, my guess. That's not super exciting, but I mean, at the same time, if you think about it, it's pretty fun to play a modular synthesizer or like an old a Prophet 5. There you go. Dave Smith, what's the future of sequential? Making the Prophet 5 again. I mean, let's face it, that was a pretty big deal. People were pretty excited about that. People were, as I saw it, people were more excited about the Prophet 5 than the Prophet X.
Yeah.
Is that what that one was called? The sample-based one?
The sampling-based one, yeah.
Right. I mean, Prophet X is very interesting. It's a super interesting synthesizer. But the fanfare around the Prophet 5 was quite a bit more. So is it because it's better? I don't know. I mean, that's, depends musician to musician. But, maybe if you talk to Richard Devine, he would be, he's definitely on that tip of like exploring some of these stranger synthesis methods that they're using for synthesizing sounds inside of virtual reality and stuff like that. They're developing whole synthesizers because they don't want to use samples because the samples can't be molded as much to the environment. So they're trying to come up with algorithms to create the sounds that are inside these virtual realities, because then those algorithms can react to what is happening inside that virtual reality, just like a real world thing would. But I wonder if like musicians are actually going to want that, though. I don't know, maybe.
I think it's always interesting. The idea of like resynthesis is a fascinating one. When you put in a sound and you get a kind of synthesized version, it gives you more programmability than a sample. Like, I suppose the question is like, what excites you about, are you excited about the Prophet 5, or are you're sat in front of or behind a CS80? So it's kind of, what kind of direction do you feel it should take or could take? For you, what would excite you?
I am really easier to please than you would think. I mean, for me, it's all about the user experience. So I get excited about things that are intriguing and are where I don't feel. I remember my first experience playing Reactor many years back, and it was I thought, this is incredible. My friend had a copy of it, and well, truth be told, this was at that time when there was the hacked Oxygen or something, like which I feel terrible about. That's not a very good thing to do. But at the time, so I had it, I played it. I mean, it was just, the possibilities seemed so incredible. It just literally just like, wow, like all of this stuff is here. This is incredible. But at the same time, I felt this kind of this wall between me and the synthesis method. And it was really hard to penetrate that wall. I mean, I tried different things. There was, the knobby boxes were starting to come out then. There was literally one, I think it was called Knobby. It was a black and yellow, had like 6 knobs on it or something like that. You tried hooking those up. You still didn't feel quite the connection. So for me, it's the connection. I have to feel a connection. I don't care how many whiz-bang wild synthesis methods it can do, because I really do feel like you can get a lot out of some of the most basic synthesis methods. You can create a lot of sounds, and probably all the sounds that you would ever crave if you know how to use it well. That's the thing. You have to know how to use it well. If you don't know how to use it, you're going to be jumping from synth to synth, because this one just happens to make good percussive sounds, and this one just happens to make good pads. Like, well, probably that one could make good pads too, and this one could probably make good percussion sounds if you just learned how to program it. But my point is being, like, for me, I get satisfied. It's the experience of using it. How do I feel when I sit in front of it? How am I compelled to play it? Do I feel like I am in like this space of beauty? Do I feel like this instrument is calling me? Is there like mystery? Is there something that makes me want to reach out and touch it and pull the sounds out of it? Sometimes I look at an instrument, I've tried to play it many times. I want to like it. I should like it. It has all these features. It has all these things it does. But time and time again, I play it and I can't seem to coax the beauty out of it. And I don't feel compelled to try any longer. It's time to move on. So for me, it's all about that experience. You got to have the experience. I don't care how many voices there is or how many different modes it has and all the different modulation matrices and stuff. The simplest thing can be amazing. The simplest thing can be incredible.
Oh, yes. What a good ending. I mean, he just wrapped that up in a bow for me, I think. Good grief. I don't care about how many modes it is. The simplest thing can be amazing. The simplest thing can be incredible. How good is that? And that not only does it obviously encapsulate many of the Make Noise modules, but things like, makes me think of Buchla modules and things like that, where it's, you look at them and you think, well, there's not much there, but yet someone can spend an entire lifetime exploring something like a Music Keys or a VCS3 and things like it. It's tempting to make modulars that just sprawl and sprawl and sprawl endlessly, but you don't need much. And as he says, there's a lot that can be wrestled from really simple oscillators and bits and bobs in combination. Really inspiring and kind of a wholesome, valuable thing to be reminded of. So thank you, Tony, for your time. That was great. What a chat. And so many little things that I'm thinking about that was sort of percolating through my brain after that conversation. His line, what is it that makes you feel wonderful when you play it? Talking about other machines. What makes you feel wonderful when you play it? Do you feel wonderful? And the fact that he's like, oh God, we have more musical instruments than we could ever possibly consume in a lifetime. So if you're going to bother making something new, you'd better make sure it's incredible. It's going to completely knock someone over. It has to. There's no reason to make it otherwise. Otherwise, you're just adding to tomorrow's landfill. And also the legendary line, you don't need pizza, you don't need burgers, you don't need beer, but you want them because they make life beautiful and enjoyable. A whole conversation just makes me want to like put together a very small modular based like a, Buchla style with just an oscillator and some interesting modulation and try and inject like the human feel. His sort of conversation about, or, suggestions, talking about interface being the thing that excites him most about things like the CS80. And that idea that you've got, on the CS80, because there's no menus, all of these performance controls, which would be buried on other synths or on the front panel. And they encourage you to set up interesting ways of interacting with the synth. Yeah, that's very insightful. And true, those things probably would be buried in menus. And perhaps that means that people don't create expressive patches on their synthesizers because they can't be bothered or they just don't know that those things are buried in menus. Food for thought. If you're a synth designer, perhaps it is worth breaking some of those things out. It might make for a better instrument. Some people are asking me recently about whether I would get a Polybrute or a UDO Super 6. Which of the polysynths would you get? And I thought about that, and my advice that I would give people, and I think it's sort of pertinent to what we were all discussing in that conversation, is that it's not a question of features. It's literally a question of what will speak to you more. And so my advice to people is always just go to a shop. Go to a shop where you've got both of them, or, one individually, go to two shops and try them both. Because just because one has more features doesn't mean that it's going to work for you or speak to you. It's that idea, that innate quality that you connect with something on some level, and it doesn't fit the whole concept of whether that thing has more features or is like on paper the better instrument. Though that has nothing to do with whether you connect with an instrument or not. And so it's like trying to ask what's the best filter. Like, it's nonsensical. Like, you can point out which filter has the most features, and you could maybe say that a certain filter is more popular because more people talk about it or whatever, but it's irrelevant because they're flavors, and flavors are intensely personal. And that flavor can be really, there are flavors to every aspect of a design, from the way it looks to the way it feels. Like, do the knobs wobble? Are they firm? How does it look? How does it catch the light? What's the typography that's on the panel? Do you like it? Does it speak to you on some deep level? Do you get like a feeling when you look at it? It's those kinds of things which I think are just unquantifiable, but really interesting. I think they're the things that Tony from Make Noise is thinking about a great deal, as he says that they've not been producing very many products because he's just like, I don't want to do it unless I can really create something that can really knock someone over, as he says. So, food for thought. Tony, thank you so much again for your time. Loved the conversation, loved chatting to you, and go Make Noise. May they live long and prosper. And yeah, that's pretty much what we have time for. I want to thank our sponsors, Signal Sounds, an excellent place to get Make Noise and other bits. As we mentioned at the top of the show, lots and lots and lots and lots of things are available at signalsounds.com. If you enjoyed this, please share it. It costs you nothing, and yet will help the podcast immeasurably. Tell your friends to listen and subscribe to Why We Bleep. Walk down the street with some kind of placard, letting all your neighbours know that you listen to Why We Bleep show. If you would like to support the show, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/Mylar Melodies. You can chip in, and that chipping in is of incredible helpage. Please consider chipping in. And I think that's pretty much us. Until next time, be well, stay safe, and we'll see you soon. Bye.